Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter of the small coffee shop one more time, even though it was already spotless. The morning rush had ended, and only a few customers remained scattered around the cozy space. Steam rose from the espresso machine as she prepared for what she hoped would be a quiet afternoon. The bell above the door chimed softly, and she looked up to see a group of men in crisp military uniforms entering. The coffee shop, Morning Brew, sat just outside the gates of Naval Base Coronado. Sarah had chosen this location carefully when she opened 3 years ago. She knew the steady stream of military personnel would provide reliable business. What she hadn't expected was how much she would come to care about each face that walked through her door. The group of officers moved with the confident stride she had come to recognize. Their uniforms were pristine, ribbons and medals catching the light from the large windows. Leading them was an older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His uniform carried more decorations than the others, and something about his presence made the entire shop feel smaller. "Good afternoon," Sarah called out with her usual warm smile. "What can I get started for you today?" The silver-haired man stepped forward while his companions found a large table near the window. "I'll have a black coffee, medium roast," he said in a voice that carried authority even in casual conversation. "Make it strong." "Coming right up, sir," Sarah replied, already reaching for her best blend. As she worked, she could hear fragments of their conversation. They were discussing upcoming training exercises and personnel rotations. It was the kind of talk she heard every day, but something felt different about this group. Sarah had always been good at reading people. It came from years of listening, watching, and understanding what people needed before they knew it themselves. These men were important. She could tell by the way other customers glanced their way, by the respectful nods from junior officers passing by the window, and by the careful way they spoke even in this casual setting. As she prepared the coffee, her mind wandered to her own past. Few people knew that before opening Morning Brew, she had worn a uniform herself. It felt like a lifetime ago, though only 5 years had passed since she had hung up her flight suit for the last time. The transition to civilian life had been harder than she expected. The coffee shop had become her anchor, her way of staying connected to the military community that had shaped her. She measured the coffee grounds with practiced precision. During her service, attention to detail had meant the difference between mission success and failure. Now it meant the difference between a good cup of coffee and a great one. The familiar ritual calmed her nerves, which had been on edge all morning for reasons she couldn't explain. The espresso machine hissed as she steamed milk for another customer's order. Through the steam, she watched the group at the table. They had spread out several documents, pointing and discussing something with intense focus. Their body language suggested this wasn't a social gathering. This was business, and important business at that. Sarah finished preparing the black coffee, making sure it was exactly the right temperature. She had learned that military personnel appreciated efficiency and quality in equal measure. She placed the cup on her best china saucer and walked over to the table. "Here you go, sir," she said, setting the coffee down in front of the silver-haired man. "1 black coffee, medium roast, extra strong." He looked up from the documents and smiled. "Thank you, miss." He paused, waiting for her to provide her name. "Sarah," she replied simply. "Sarah Martinez." The man nodded and reached for the coffee. As he lifted it to his lips, Sarah noticed the wedding ring on his finger and the small pin on his collar that indicated he was an admiral. She had learned to read military insignia during her years of service, though she tried not to make it obvious that she understood the hierarchy. "Excellent coffee, Sarah," the Admiral said after taking a sip. "You know your way around an espresso machine." "Thank you, sir. I take pride in my work." Sarah was about to turn away when she noticed something that made her pause. One of the documents on the table had familiar-looking aircraft schematics. Her trained eye caught details that most civilians would miss. These weren't just any aircraft. They were FA-18 Super Hornets, the same type she had flown in combat zones. The Admiral noticed her glance at the papers and instinctively moved to cover them. It was a subtle gesture, but one that spoke of years of handling classified information. "Sorry about the mess," he said diplomatically. "We're just reviewing some routine operational matters." Sarah nodded and smiled. "Of course, sir. Let me know if you need anything else." She turned and walked back to the counter, her mind racing. The schematics she had glimpsed weren't routine. She could tell by the modifications marked on them, by the mission profiles noted in the margins. This was advanced tactical planning. As she cleaned glasses behind the counter, Sarah found herself thinking about her last mission. It had been a night operation over hostile territory, flying close air support for ground troops under fire. She could still remember the weight of responsibility she felt, knowing that lives depended on her precision and skill. The mission had been successful, but it had also been her last. The injuries she sustained during the emergency landing had ended her flying career. She glanced back at the table where the Admiral and his team continued their discussion. One of the younger officers was pointing at something on a map, his expression serious. Sarah recognized the look. It was the same expression she had worn during mission briefings, when the stakes were high and failure wasn't an option. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the coffee shop. Sarah busied herself with routine tasks, but her attention kept drifting back to the group of officers. She couldn't shake the feeling that their presence here was somehow significant, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Another customer approached the counter, a young ensign who came in regularly. "The usual, Danny?" Sarah asked, already reaching for the medium roast. "Yes, ma'am. And Sarah?" The young man lowered his voice. "Do you know who that is over there?" He nodded toward the Admiral's table. Sarah shrugged casually. "Just another customer to me. Why?" Danny looked impressed. "That's Admiral Thompson. He's in charge of the entire Pacific Fleet air operations. The guy's a legend. He flew combat missions in 3 different conflicts and has more decorations than anyone I've ever seen." Sarah's hand paused as she poured Danny's coffee. Admiral Thompson. The name was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. She had heard it during her service, but in what context? She forced herself to continue pouring, maintaining her casual expression. "Sounds like an important man," she said simply, handing Danny his coffee. "Important. He's probably the most respected naval aviator of his generation. My instructor at flight school used to tell stories about his missions. The guy's got ice in his veins." As Danny walked away, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Admiral Thompson. Suddenly, she remembered where she had heard the name. It had been during her final mission briefing. He had been mentioned as the operational commander for their sector. He was the one who had authorized her mission, the one who had signed off on the dangerous, close air support operation that had ended her career. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she wiped down the counter again. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was the man whose signature had sent her into harm's way, sitting in her coffee shop, drinking coffee she had personally prepared. He had no idea who she was, of course. To him, she was just another civilian business owner. The conversation at the Admiral's table grew more intense. Sarah could see them pointing at different locations on what appeared to be a tactical map. Their discussion was animated, but quiet, the kind of controlled urgency that came with discussing matters of national security in a public place. Sarah found herself studying Admiral Thompson more carefully. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in challenging conditions. His eyes were sharp and alert, constantly scanning his surroundings even during casual conversation. She recognized the behavior. It was the heightened awareness that came with years of military service, especially in combat roles. As the afternoon wore on, the coffee shop began to empty. The Admiral and his team remained, their documents spread across the table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Sarah noticed that they had ordered several more rounds of coffee, but barely touched the pastries she had offered. Their focus was entirely on their work. Around 4 o'clock, a new group of officers entered the shop. These men wore different uniforms, and Sarah recognized them as Air Force personnel. They approached the Admiral's table with respectful nods and joined the discussion. The meeting was expanding, becoming something more significant than a simple planning session. Sarah continued her routine tasks, but every instinct told her that something important was happening. The mix of Navy and Air Force personnel, the detailed maps and aircraft schematics, the careful way they spoke even when they thought no one was listening. This wasn't routine operational planning. This was preparation for something major. As she prepared another pot of coffee, Sarah noticed that one of the Air Force officers looked familiar. She studied his face carefully, trying to place him. Then it hit her. Colonel Martinez. He had been her commanding officer's liaison during her final mission. She had met him during the post-incident debriefing, when she was still recovering from her injuries. The realization sent a shock through her system. This wasn't coincidence. The presence of both Admiral Thompson and Colonel Martinez in her coffee shop, reviewing what appeared to be operational plans, suggested something significant was in motion. Sarah's military training kicked in, and she began to pay closer attention to everything happening around her. The bell above the door chimed again, and Sarah looked up to see a woman in civilian clothes enter. She was young, maybe early 30s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested military background despite her casual dress. The woman approached the counter with a smile. "Hi there. I'm looking for a good strong coffee and maybe some advice about the area. I just got assigned to the base." Sarah smiled back. "Welcome to Coronado. What kind of work will you be doing?" "I'm a pilot," the woman replied. "Just transferred from overseas. I'll be flying FA-18s. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Another piece fell into place. New pilots arriving, senior commanders meeting, tactical planning sessions. Something big was definitely happening, and Sarah found herself right in the middle of it, invisible behind her civilian disguise. Sarah prepared the new pilot's coffee with steady hands, though her mind was racing. The young woman introduced herself as Lieutenant Commander Jessica Walsh, and something about her eagerness reminded Sarah of her younger self, the excitement of a new assignment, the confidence that came with being selected for an elite squadron, the belief that nothing could go wrong. "What squadron will you be joining?" Sarah asked casually as she worked the espresso machine. "VFA 147, the Argonauts," Jessica replied with obvious pride. "I've heard they're the best of the best. Flying combat missions in some pretty intense areas lately." Sarah's hand froze on the espresso machine handle. VFA 147, her old squadron. The same unit she had flown with during that final mission 5 years ago. The same squadron that had been her family, her brotherhood, her entire world, until everything changed in an instant over hostile territory. That's a good squadron," Sarah managed, her voice barely steady. "They have an excellent reputation." Jessica beamed. "I can't wait to meet the team. I heard they're getting ready for a major deployment. Something big is happening, though nobody's talking about specifics yet." Sarah finished preparing the coffee and handed it to Jessica, their fingers brushing briefly. For a moment, Sarah wanted to tell this young pilot everything. About the dangers that weren't in any manual, about the split-second decisions that could change everything, about how quickly a routine mission could turn into a nightmare. Instead, she smiled and wished her luck. As Jessica found a table near the back of the shop, Sarah noticed Admiral Thompson glance in her direction. For just a moment, their eyes met across the room. Something flickered in his expression, a brief moment of uncertainty, as if he was trying to remember something. Then one of his officers said something, and his attention returned to the maps spread before them. Sarah retreated behind the counter, her heart pounding. She busied herself cleaning equipment that was already clean, trying to process what she had learned. Her old squadron was preparing for a major deployment. The same officers who had been involved in her final mission were here planning something significant. And now a new pilot was joining the unit, full of the same enthusiasm Sarah had once felt. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting longer shadows across the coffee shop. Most of the regular customers had left, leaving only the military personnel and a few students with laptops. The atmosphere felt charged with tension, though Sarah wasn't sure if that was her imagination or if something was genuinely building. Around 5 o'clock, another familiar face walked through the door. Commander Mike Torres, the squadron operations officer from VFA 147. Sarah recognized him immediately, though he had gained some gray hair since she last saw him. He had been the one who debriefed her after the mission, who had sat beside her hospital bed and explained why her flying career was over. Torres approached the Admiral's table and was quickly integrated into the discussion. Sarah watched as he spread out additional documents, pointing to various locations on the maps. His presence confirmed what she already suspected. This meeting was directly related to her old squadron and whatever mission they were preparing for. Sarah found herself thinking about the day she had first met Admiral Thompson. Though it had been brief, and she doubted he would remember, it was during a ceremony where several pilots were being recognized for their service. She had received a medal for her actions during a previous mission, and Admiral Thompson had personally pinned it to her uniform. He had looked her in the eye and said, "The Navy is proud of pilots like you, Lieutenant Commander Martinez." That had been 6 months before her final mission, 6 months before everything changed. Now, as she watched him review what appeared to be mission plans, Sarah wondered if he ever thought about the pilots whose lives had been altered by his decisions. Did he remember the names of those who had been injured or killed during operations he had authorized? Did he carry that weight, or was it simply part of the burden of command? Jessica Walsh appeared at the counter, her empty cup in hand. "Could I get a refill? That was excellent coffee." "Of course," Sarah replied, reaching for the pot. "How are you settling into the area?" "Still getting oriented. I'm supposed to report to my new squadron tomorrow morning. I'm a little nervous, to be honest. It's always challenging being the new person." Sarah poured the coffee slowly, choosing her words carefully. "What kind of flying experience do you have?" 2 combat deployments in the Middle East, about 800 flight hours in Super Hornets. I was flying close air support missions, mostly working with ground forces." Jessica paused, then added, "Actually, that's why I'm here. They needed someone with KAS experience for this new assignment. Close air support, the same type of missions Sarah had flown. The same dangerous work that required split-second timing and absolute precision." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that Jessica was likely being brought in to replace her, to fill the role she had left vacant. "CAS work is challenging," Sarah said carefully. "You have to be ready for anything." "That's what I've heard. My previous CO said this squadron has some of the most experienced KS pilots in the fleet. Apparently they had one pilot a few years back who was legendary for her precision under fire. Nobody would tell me her name, but they said she saved a lot of lives before." Jessica trailed off, realizing she might be sharing too much information. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she handed back the refilled cup. "Before what?" "Before she was injured in action. I guess it ended her career. My CO said it was a real loss for the Navy. Someone that talented doesn't come along very often." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was the legendary pilot Jessica had heard about. The stories were about her missions, her precision, her ability to deliver ordnance exactly where it was needed when lives hung in the balance. And now this young pilot was here to take her place, to carry on the work Sarah could no longer do. As Jessica returned to her table, Sarah noticed that the meeting at Admiral Thompson's table was becoming more intense. Commander Torres was pointing to specific coordinates on the map, while Admiral Thompson asked pointed questions. The Air Force colonel was taking notes, and everyone seemed focused on timing and logistics. Sarah's military training allowed her to read the body language and understand the urgency building in the room. This wasn't just planning for a future operation. This was final preparation for something happening soon. Very soon. The coffee shop's phone rang, startling Sarah from her observations. It was her supplier, calling about a delayed shipment of coffee beans. As she discussed delivery schedules, she kept one eye on the military group. When she hung up, she noticed that they had cleared away most of their documents and were preparing to leave. Admiral Thompson stood first, his officers quickly following suit. They moved with the efficient purpose of people who had accomplished their objectives and had other pressing matters to attend to. As they gathered their materials, Sarah realized this might be her only chance to hear what they were discussing. She moved closer to their table under the pretense of cleaning nearby surfaces. As she wiped down chairs and straightened salt shakers, she caught fragments of their conversation. 0600 tomorrow, Admiral Thompson was saying. Full briefing for all squadron commanders. What about the new pilot? Commander Torres asked. Walsh is supposed to report in the morning. She'll be briefed separately. Her specific role in this operation is classified above her current clearance level. Sarah's blood ran cold. They were talking about Jessica, the young pilot who had just joined VFA 147. Whatever operation they were planning, Jessica was going to be part of it, and it was dangerous enough to require special classification protocols. Sir, one of the Air Force officers interjected, what about contingency planning? If the primary approach fails, we'll need alternatives. Admiral Thompson's expression grew grim. That's exactly why we're bringing in additional KS specialists. This mission has no margin for error. We need pilots who can adapt instantly to changing conditions. Sarah felt her heart racing. Close air support specialists. Pilots who could adapt to changing conditions. They were describing exactly the kind of mission she used to fly, the type of operation that required the skills she had spent years developing. Skills that had ultimately led to her career-ending injury. As the group prepared to leave, Admiral Thompson paused and looked around the coffee shop one more time. His gaze lingered on Sarah for just a moment longer than seemed casual. There was something in his expression, a hint of recognition that made her nervous. Excellent coffee, Sarah, he said, approaching the counter. We'll likely be back tomorrow if that's all right with you. Of course, sir. You're always welcome here. The Admiral studied her face more carefully. Sarah Martinez, did you say? That's an interesting name. I once knew a pilot with that name. Exceptional officer, tremendous skill in close air support operations. She saved a lot of lives during her service. Sarah's mouth went dry. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone in the shop could hear it. The Admiral was fishing, testing whether she was who he thought she might be. She forced herself to maintain eye contact and keep her expression neutral. Martinez is a pretty common name, sir. Must be a coincidence. Admiral Thompson nodded slowly, but his eyes never left her face. Perhaps. Though in my experience, there aren't many coincidences in the military community. People have a way of crossing paths again, especially when they share common experiences. Sarah managed a polite smile. I'm just a coffee shop owner now, sir, but I'm glad to serve anyone who serves our country. The Admiral reached into his wallet and placed a $20 bill on the counter for a $5 cup of coffee. Keep the change. And Sarah, if you ever decide you want to contribute to military operations in a different capacity, there are always opportunities for people with the right skills and experience. With that cryptic comment, Admiral Thompson turned and led his group out of the coffee shop. The bell chimed as the door closed behind them, leaving Sarah alone with Jessica Walsh and a few remaining customers. Her hands shook as she picked up the $20 bill, realizing that Admiral Thompson suspected exactly who she was. Jessica approached the counter again, having witnessed the interaction. Wow, that seemed like an important conversation. Do you know who that was? Sarah nodded. Admiral Thompson. He's in charge of Pacific Fleet Air Operations. And he was talking to you like he knew you from somewhere. Have you two met before? Sarah looked at the young pilot, seeing her own past reflected in Jessica's eager face. In a few hours, Jessica would report to VFA 147 and begin preparing for a mission that could change her life forever. She would trust her commanders, follow her orders, and fly into danger because that's what naval aviators did. We may have crossed paths a long time ago, Sarah said finally, in a different life. As Jessica left the coffee shop, Sarah realized that tomorrow would bring more than just another day of serving coffee to military personnel. Admiral Thompson would return, and when he did, she had the feeling that her carefully constructed civilian life was about to collide with her military past in ways she couldn't predict or control. Sarah barely slept that night. She kept replaying Admiral Thompson's words, the way he had looked at her, the deliberate nature of his comments about coincidences and crossing paths. By 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and headed to the coffee shop early, needing the familiar routine to calm her nerves. The morning rush was heavier than usual, filled with personnel from both the naval base and the nearby Air Force installation. Word had spread through the military community that something significant was happening, though nobody seemed to know exactly what. Sarah served cup after cup of coffee to officers who spoke in hushed tones about increased security briefings and sudden schedule changes. Around 8 o'clock, Jessica Walsh appeared at the counter, looking pale and slightly overwhelmed. She was now wearing her service uniform instead of civilian clothes, and Sarah could see the weight of new responsibility in her eyes. "How did your first day go?" Sarah asked, though Jessica's expression already provided part of the answer. "Intense. They briefed me on the mission parameters, and let's just say it's going to be challenging. I can't discuss details, but—" Jessica paused, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Sarah, have you ever felt like you were walking in someone else's footsteps? Like you were trying to fill a space that belonged to someone extraordinary?" Sarah's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" The squadron has this almost reverent way of talking about a pilot who used to fly with them. They call her Phoenix because she had this ability to rise above impossible situations and always find a way to complete the mission. Nobody will tell me what happened to her, but I get the feeling I'm being asked to do the same type of work she used to do. Phoenix. Sarah's call sign. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 5 years, and hearing it from Jessica's lips felt like a physical blow. Every pilot earned their call sign through actions or personality traits that defined them. Sarah had earned hers during a mission where her aircraft had been badly damaged by enemy fire, but she had somehow managed to keep it flying and complete her objective. Her squadron mates said she had risen from the ashes of certain failure like the mythical bird. "I'm sure you'll do fine," Sarah managed to say. "Just trust your training and your instincts." Jessica nodded and ordered her usual coffee before heading to a table near the window. As Sarah prepared the drink, she noticed several other VFA 147 personnel entering the shop. They moved with the focused energy of people preparing for something important, and their presence filled the small space with tension. Around 9:30, the bell above the door chimed with a familiar authority. Admiral Thompson entered, followed by the same group of officers from yesterday, plus several new faces Sarah didn't recognize. They moved directly to their table from the previous day, and Sarah noticed they had even more documents than before. "Good morning, Sarah," Admiral Thompson called out. "Could we get the same orders as yesterday?" "Of course, sir. I'll bring everything right over." As Sarah prepared their coffees, she couldn't help but notice the increased security around the group. 2 junior officers had positioned themselves near the entrance, and she could see others outside maintaining a discreet perimeter. Whatever they were discussing today was clearly more sensitive than yesterday's meeting. Sarah delivered the first round of coffees, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite the growing tension in her chest. Admiral Thompson accepted his cup with a nod, but his attention was focused on a series of satellite photographs spread across the table. Sarah recognized them as reconnaissance images of mountainous terrain, the type of hostile territory where close air support missions were most dangerous. "Phoenix was the best we ever had in this type of environment," Commander Torres was saying as Sarah approached with the remaining drinks. Her ability to deliver precision strikes in confined spaces saved countless lives. If we had someone with her skills for this operation— Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee cups. They were talking about her again, using her call sign, discussing her abilities in the past tense. Admiral Thompson noticed her reaction and fixed her with a steady stare. "Is everything all right, Sarah?" "Yes, sir. Just trying not to spill coffee on your important documents." Admiral Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. "These documents are classified, but thank you for your concern. Tell me, have you ever heard the call sign Phoenix before?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt every eye in the coffee shop turn toward her, though she knew most customers weren't actually paying attention. Her mouth went dry as she struggled to formulate a response. "I might have heard it mentioned around the base, sir. Sounds like it belonged to someone impressive." "Indeed it did." Admiral Thompson leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "Phoenix was a naval aviator who flew some of the most dangerous close air support missions of her generation. She had an uncanny ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions and deliver ordnance with surgical precision. Her actions during Operation Desert Shield saved over 200 ground personnel." Sarah's heart pounded as she listened to Admiral Thompson describe her own missions. Operation Desert Shield had been her finest hour, a complex operation where she had provided air support for a trapped Marine unit surrounded by enemy forces. She had made multiple passes through intense anti-aircraft fire, using her aircraft as a shield while evacuating wounded personnel. "What happened to this Phoenix pilot?" Jessica Walsh asked from her nearby table, having overheard the conversation. Commander Torres answered before Admiral Thompson could respond. "She was critically injured during her final mission, an emergency landing in hostile territory after taking massive damage from surface-to-air missiles. She managed to save her aircraft and avoid civilian casualties, but the injuries ended her flying career." Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. They were discussing the worst day of her life as if she wasn't standing right there. The day when everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, had come to an abrupt end in a cloud of smoke and twisted metal. "Sir," one of the Air Force officers interjected, "what about using the new pilot for this mission? Walsh has the right qualifications, and her KAS experience is exactly what we need." Admiral Thompson shook his head. "Lieutenant Commander Walsh is skilled, but this operation requires someone who can think like Phoenix did. Someone who understands not just the technical aspects of close air support, but the intuitive elements that separate good pilots from legendary ones." Sarah couldn't take it anymore. The weight of standing there invisible while they discussed her past, her missions, her sacrifice, was becoming unbearable. She turned to walk back to the counter, but Admiral Thompson's voice stopped her. "Sarah, one more question if you don't mind." She turned back slowly, knowing this was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "During your time around the base, have you ever met any former naval aviators? Perhaps someone who might have insight into the type of operations we're planning?" It was another test, another opportunity for her to reveal herself or maintain her cover. Sarah looked around the coffee shop, seeing Jessica Walsh watching expectantly, seeing the other officers waiting for her response, seeing her carefully constructed civilian life hanging in the balance. "Sir, I meet a lot of veterans in my line of work. Many of them prefer to keep their service records private." Admiral Thompson nodded thoughtfully. That's understandable. Military service, especially combat operations, can be difficult to discuss. But sometimes circumstances arise where that experience becomes invaluable again. He stood up suddenly, moving around the table to face Sarah directly. The entire coffee shop seemed to hold its breath as he studied her face with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle. Sarah Martinez, Phoenix. He spoke the words quietly, but with absolute certainty. You didn't just hear about those missions, you flew them. The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation in the coffee shop stopped. Jessica Walsh's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Commander Torres looked up from the maps with shock written across his face. Even the customers at other tables seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Sarah felt 5 years of carefully maintained secrecy crumble in an instant. Her civilian disguise, her anonymous life as a coffee shop owner, her escape from the weight of her military past, all of it evaporated under Admiral Thompson's knowing gaze. "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean," she whispered, but the words carried no conviction. Admiral Thompson reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph. He placed it on the counter between them. It was an official Navy photograph showing Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez in her flight suit, standing beside her FA-18 Super Hornet. Her call sign Phoenix was clearly visible painted below the cockpit. "This photograph was taken 3 weeks before your final mission," Admiral Thompson said quietly. "You were being considered for promotion to squadron commander. Your record was exemplary, your skills were unmatched, and your dedication to mission success was absolute." Sarah stared at the photograph, seeing her younger self full of confidence and purpose. The woman in that picture had believed she was invincible, that her skill and determination could overcome any challenge. She had no idea that in 3 weeks, her world would be shattered during a routine support mission that went catastrophically wrong. "I remember signing the orders for your final operation," Admiral Thompson continued. "I also remember reading the after-action report. You completed your mission objectives despite taking critical damage. You saved the lives of 37 ground personnel, avoided civilian casualties during your emergency landing, and somehow managed to walk away from a crash that should have been fatal." Tears began to form in Sarah's eyes as the memories came flooding back. The emergency alarms screaming in her cockpit, the ground rushing toward her at impossible speed, the certainty that she was going to die. And then, somehow, the miracle of survival and the devastating realization that her flying days were over. "You also remember that I recommended you for the Navy Cross," Admiral Thompson said. "You turned it down. Said you didn't want recognition for failing to complete your mission perfectly." "I lost the aircraft," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "People could have been killed because of my mistakes." "You saved lives," Admiral Thompson corrected firmly. "Your actions that day exemplified everything we hope for in a naval aviator: skill, courage, and selfless dedication to mission success, even in the face of certain death." Commander Torres stood up from his chair, his expression a mixture of shock and recognition. "Phoenix? My God, we've been looking for you for 5 years. After you disappeared from the hospital, we tried to track you down. We wanted to make sure you were all right, that you had the support you needed." Sarah wiped her eyes with a napkin, struggling to maintain her composure. "I needed to start over. I couldn't be the pilot I was before, so I had to find a new way to serve." Jessica Walsh approached the counter slowly, her face filled with awe. "You're Phoenix? The pilot everyone talks about? The one whose missions I'm supposed to continue?" Sarah nodded, finally accepting that her secret was out. "I was Phoenix, but that person doesn't exist anymore. Now I'm just Sarah, and I make coffee." Admiral Thompson shook his head. "Phoenix, you're exactly the person we need for this operation. Your knowledge of chaos tactics, your understanding of battlefield dynamics, your ability to think under pressure. None of that was lost in the crash. It's still here. He tapped his temple. And we need it now. The coffee shop remained silent as everyone waited for Sarah's response. She looked around at the faces watching her, Jessica Walsh with hopeful expectation, Commander Torres with professional respect, Admiral Thompson with something approaching desperation. Then she looked at the maps and photographs spread across their table, recognizing the type of mission that had once been her specialty. "Sir," she said finally, "I can't fly anymore. The injuries, my depth perception is compromised. I would be a danger to myself and others in a cockpit." "We're not asking you to fly," Admiral Thompson replied. "We're asking you to plan, to use your expertise to design the mission parameters for someone else to execute. Lieutenant Commander Walsh has the flying skills, but she needs the tactical wisdom that only comes from your level of experience." Sarah looked at Jessica, seeing herself as she had been years ago. Young, talented, eager to serve, but lacking the hard-won knowledge that came from facing the worst possible scenarios and finding ways to survive them. "The mission we're planning," Admiral Thompson continued, "involves close air support in mountainous terrain with significant anti-aircraft threats. It's exactly the type of operation where your expertise could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." Sarah realized that this moment had been inevitable from the day she opened the coffee shop near the base. She had tried to leave her military past behind, but it had found her anyway. The question now was whether she was ready to embrace who she had been in service of who she could become. "Admiral," she said, her voice growing stronger, "if I'm going to help plan this mission, I need to know everything. No classified restrictions, no need-to-know limitations. If you want Phoenix's expertise, you have to trust Phoenix's judgment." Admiral Thompson smiled for the first time since entering the coffee shop. "Phoenix, welcome back to active duty. We've been waiting for you to come home." As the room erupted in quiet conversation and renewed energy, Sarah realized that her 5-year journey from the cockpit to the coffee counter had all been preparation for this moment. She was still Phoenix, still the pilot who could rise from impossible situations. She had just found a new way to fly,